During our honeymoon, my mother-in-law pulled off a shocking betrayal by stealing my $25,000 diamond necklace. When we got home and I asked her about it, she exploded in anger. She slapped me hard and pushed me against the wall. To my surprise, my husband stood by her side. Heartbroken, I left the house, planning my revenge. They had no idea I had a big surprise coming that would change everything. My name's Lisa, and I'm a 30-year-old software developer living in San Francisco. When I think back to my life, I can still remember the excitement of my wedding day, the hope I felt for the future, and the way my heart swelled with love for my college sweetheart, James. We had met during our university years and bonded over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of what our lives would look like. I thought I had found my perfect partner. But as the saying goes, the path to true happiness isn't always smooth. Shortly after we exchanged vows, I realized that my fairy tale was beginning to unravel. The first signs of trouble were subtle, like a slow leak in a tire that gradually worsens until you're stranded on the side of the road. The culprit? James's mother, Martha. Martha, a woman in her mid-50s, raised James on her own and had always been fiercely protective of him. I had seen this dynamic during our dating years. She often called him several times a day, insisting on knowing his whereabouts and opinions on everything. I had assumed it was just a quirky part of their relationship, something I could work around. After all, love is about compromise, right? But once we were married, her interference turned into something much more invasive. Almost immediately, Martha began criticizing my choices, everything from the way I decorated our home to the meals I prepared. I remember one particular instance when she visited unannounced and found me experimenting with a new recipe. "What are you cooking, Lisa?" "That looks awful," she said with a disdainful look on her face, as if she were inspecting a science experiment gone wrong. "Just trying a new pasta dish, Martha," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Isn't it a bit too rich?" "You should stick to the basics," she retorted, shaking her head. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, but I tried to brush it off. I thought she means well. I kept reminding myself that she was just trying to help, even when it felt like she was tearing me down. As weeks turned into months, her visits became more frequent and less welcome. She would drop by without calling, using a spare key that I didn't even know she had. I would walk into our living room, only to find her rearranging the furniture as if it were her own home. "This will give the space a better flow," she would say, waving her hand dismissively when I expressed my hesitations. The tension between Martha and me grew, and James seemed oblivious. Whenever I would try to bring it up, he would shrug it off, saying things like, "You know how my mom is. Just try to be patient." It was infuriating. How could he not see how her behavior was affecting me? I began to feel isolated, trapped in a situation where my voice was drowned out by his mother's constant interference. The love I felt for James started to fade under the weight of frustration and hurt. Then, one day, James suggested we go on a honeymoon to Hawaii, a chance to reconnect and escape the chaos. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Finally, a break for Martha. However, that relief was short-lived when Martha insisted on joining us. "James, I don't think that's a good idea," I said, trying to mask my panic. But James, for the first time, stood his ground. "Mom, it's not a family trip. It's our honeymoon, just Lisa and me." I was stunned. This was the first time I saw him assert himself against his mother, and it filled me with hope. Maybe there was a chance for us after all. When we returned from the trip, everything seemed to be in place. James and I had rekindled our romance, and I was excited to return home. But when I opened the door to our bedroom, my heart dropped. Our room was a disaster zone. Clothes were thrown everywhere, jewelry drawers were broken, and my precious diamond necklace, a wedding gift from my mother worth $25,000, was missing. "James, come here," I screamed, my voice shaking. "What's wrong?" he asked, rushing into the room. "I can't find my necklace. Look at this mess. What happened here?" I gestured wildly at the chaos. James's face paled as he surveyed the room. "I don't know." "This is so strange," he muttered, confusion and concern etched across his face. Desperate, I turned to him. Do you think it could be? No, Lisa. I can't believe my mother would do something like this, he interrupted, his tone defensive. I swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in my stomach. But deep down, the suspicion crept in. I couldn't shake the feeling that Martha was somehow involved. I needed to find answers. That night, sleep eluded me as I tossed and turned, haunted by the disarray of our bedroom and the absence of my cherished necklace. I couldn't understand how Martha could betray me like this. The woman who I thought was merely overbearing had transformed into someone I feared. The following day, I decided to take action. I visited several jewelry stores in the area, searching for any sign of my necklace. After hours of looking and nearly giving up hope, I entered a small shop tucked away in a corner of the city. As I scanned the displays, my heart stopped. There it was, my diamond necklace gleaming under the glass. "Excuse me," I called the shopkeeper over. "Can I see that necklace, please?" When I held it in my hands, it felt like the ground beneath me shifted. I needed to know who had sold it. "Can you show me the CCTV footage from when this necklace came in?" I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. The shopkeeper obliged, and as I watched the footage, my heart sank. There, clearly on the screen, was Martha, my mother-in-law, handing over my precious necklace. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, anger, and disbelief. Furious, I rushed home, ready to confront her. But as I approached the door, I found Martha waiting for me, arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. "What are you doing here, Lisa? You look like you've seen a ghost," she sneered. "Don't play games with me, Martha." "I know what you did," I snapped, my heart pounding. Her smile faltered for a moment, and in that split second, I felt a surge of confidence. I had the proof, but what happened next would change everything. I was about to confront the woman who had wreaked havoc in my life. I just didn't know how deep the betrayal would run. Standing at the doorstep, I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Martha's presence was suffocating, and I felt the anger bubbling inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. I had never imagined confronting my mother-in-law would feel like this, like stepping into a battlefield where the stakes were so high. "Lisa, why are you staring at me like that? If you have something to say, just say it," Martha said, her tone dripping with mockery. "Enough with the games, Martha. I know you sold my diamond necklace." I blurted out, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "I saw you on the security footage at the jewelry store." Her expression changed instantaneously. The smugness vanished, replaced by a flicker of anger. "How dare you accuse me of stealing?" she retorted, her voice rising. "You've always had a wild imagination, haven't you?" "I'm not imagining anything. You took something that doesn't belong to you, and it's time you admit it." I shot back, stepping closer to her, unwilling to let her intimidation tactics work on me this time. Martha's eyes narrowed as she took a step forward, invading my personal space. "You think you can come into my house and throw accusations at me? You're just jealous that I raised James alone and that he still cares for me. You'll never be as important as his mother," she spat, her voice full of venom. "Being his wife doesn't mean I'm less important. You need to understand that I'm part of this family too, but you act like I'm just an inconvenience," I replied, my heart racing. I felt an overwhelming need to defend myself, to make her see that I was not going to back down this time. Suddenly, James walked through the door, a bag of groceries in hand. The moment he saw us standing there, tension thick in the air, he dropped the bag and rushed over. "What's going on? Why does it look like you two are about to kill each other?" "Martha has been lying to me, James. I know she sold my necklace, and I'm done pretending everything is fine," I said, my voice rising. I turned to him, desperate for support. "You need to believe me. I have proof." James looked between us, confusion etched on his face. "Mom, is this true?" he asked, his tone wavering. "I didn't do anything. Lisa is just trying to stir up trouble because she can't handle the fact that I'm still in your life," Martha interjected, throwing her hands up defensively. James's gaze shifted from his mother to me, and I could see the turmoil in his eyes. "I need to hear this from both of you. What exactly happened?" he asked, trying to mediate. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. I found the necklace in a pawn shop, James. I have the footage. Your mother sold it while we were on our honeymoon, I explained, the words rushing out of me. James turned to Martha, who was now visibly sweating, her composure cracking. Is that true? Did you sell Lisa's necklace? I borrowed it, she stammered, trying to twist the narrative. I thought it was just lying around. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Borrowed? It's not borrowing if you sell it. I shouted, my frustration boiling over. You stole it. You knew how much it meant to me. Stop yelling, both of you, James shouted, his voice echoing in the small entryway. This is not helping. Mom, why would you do something like this? It was a mistake. Martha snapped, her defensive nature kicking in. I thought it was just an old piece of jewelry, something that was forgotten. I didn't know it was special to her. Enough of your excuses, I exclaimed. You've done nothing but disrespect me since day one. I've tried to be patient, but this is crossing a line. James's silence was deafening. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for him to pull me back or let me fall. I can't believe this, James finally said, looking defeated. Mom, you have to understand what you did is unacceptable. We need to figure out how to fix this. Fix this? How can we fix this when she's made it clear she doesn't trust me? I said, pointing at Martha. I'm done being the one who has to compromise. You need to make a choice, James. Martha's eyes flashed with anger as she took a step back, her expression darkening. You think you can come into our family and make demands? You're nothing without my son. That statement stung like a slap to the face, and I felt tears prick my eyes. I am not nothing. I am his wife, and I deserve your respect. James looked between us, visibly torn. I need time to think, he finally said, his voice low. I can't deal with this right now. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me alone with Martha. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I felt a sense of despair wash over me, knowing that things had reached a breaking point. Your husband is weak, Lisa, Martha sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. You'll never win this fight. I will always be his mother. In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay in this toxic environment any longer. I felt like a puppet on strings, and it was time to cut them. I needed to reclaim my life, my identity, and my dignity. With that thought, I turned on my heel and walked out, determined to find a way to seek justice for the betrayal I had suffered. Leaving James and Martha in that heated moment was one of the hardest things I had ever done. I felt like I was walking away from my marriage, but I knew that staying would only lead to more heartache. As I drove back to my mother's house, my heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. I couldn't let Martha's betrayal go unpunished. When I arrived, my mother was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. The smell of her famous lasagna filled the air, and for a brief moment, I felt comforted. But the weight of my troubles came crashing back as I recounted the events of the day. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry you're going through this, my mother said, her eyes filled with concern. You deserve so much better. I need to do something about it, Mom. I can't just let her get away with this, I replied, my voice firm. I'm going to report her to the police. My mother's face reflected my own determination. If that's what you think is best, then I support you. We'll gather any evidence you need. That night, we pored over the footage from the jewelry store and made a list of everything that had happened. I documented my conversations with James, highlighting how dismissive he had been about Martha's behavior. I felt empowered, like I was taking back control over my life. The next day, I contacted the local police department and scheduled an appointment to report the theft. As I prepared for my meeting, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, nervousness, anger, but also a sense of purpose. I was no longer the quiet wife being pushed around. I was ready to stand up for myself. When I arrived at the station, I was greeted by an officer who took me into a small room to discuss my case. I showed him the footage of Martha selling the necklace and explained the situation. The officer listened intently, nodding along as I spoke. "This is a serious matter, Ms. Miller. Theft is not something we take lightly. We'll need to investigate further, but I assure you that we will do everything we can to help you," he said, his tone reassuring. Relief washed over me as I left the station. I had taken the first step toward justice, and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was determined to see this through, no matter how hard it might be. Over the next few days, the police worked diligently on my case, collecting evidence and reaching out to pawn shops in the area. They were able to confirm the sale of my necklace and also uncovered additional details that pointed to Martha's history of questionable behavior. One afternoon, as I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table, my phone rang. It was the officer I had spoken to earlier. "Ms. Miller, we've gathered enough evidence to move forward with an arrest. Would you like to be present when we take your mother-in-law into custody?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, the gravity of the situation hitting me. But then I remembered how much Martha had hurt me, how she had invaded my life and disrespected my marriage. "Yes, I want to be there," I replied, my voice steady. The following day, I drove to the location where they had planned to arrest Martha. My heart raced as I waited, anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My mother-in-law, the woman who was supposed to support me, was about to face the consequences of her actions. When the police arrived, they approached Martha as she was leaving her house, her usual air of arrogance stripped away. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. "Martha Ellen, you are under arrest for theft," the officer announced, and I felt a surge of triumph rush through me. This was justice. As they handcuffed her and led her away, I stood there, watching her world crumble. I realized that I was finally free from the chains that had bound me, and in that moment, I felt empowered. I was no longer the victim. I was a survivor, ready to reclaim my life. The day Martha was arrested marked a pivotal moment in my life. I had faced her down and taken control of my own narrative. After the police took her away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and an undeniable sense of empowerment. I knew that I had done the right thing, but the reality of the situation weighed heavily on my heart. In the days that followed, I found myself in a whirlwind of legal processes. Martha's arrest led to charges of theft, and I learned that she would likely face serious consequences for her actions. I felt a sense of closure starting to form, but I also had to confront the fact that my marriage with James was hanging by a thread. James reached out to me multiple times, pleading for a chance to talk. I was hesitant, but knew we needed to address the elephant in the room. One evening, we met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. As I walked in, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. Could we salvage our relationship, or had too much damage been done? "Lisa, I'm so glad you agreed to meet," James said, his voice shaky as he sat down across from me. "I've been worried sick about you." "I've been worried about you too, James," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "But we need to talk about everything that's happened. You need to understand how hurtful your mother's actions were and how your support, or lack thereof, affected me." He nodded, looking down at his coffee. "I know. I can't believe she would do something like that. I should have stood up for you sooner. I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough, James. Your mother has caused irreparable harm," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I've lost trust in both of you. You need to decide whose side you're on." "I'm on your side, Lisa." "I love you," he exclaimed, desperation creeping into his voice. "Then you need to prove it." "I can't continue in a marriage where I feel like a second-class citizen," I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You need to choose between me and her." We talked for hours, but it was clear that the rift between us was too wide. Although he professed his love for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that his loyalty to his mother would always come first. As we parted ways that evening, I knew I had made my decision. The following week, I filed for divorce. It was painful, but I felt lighter, as if I had shed a weight I had been carrying for far too long. Martha's court date was set for a few weeks later. When the day arrived, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation as I entered the courtroom. I wanted to see justice served, to show Martha that her actions had consequences. When she walked in, she looked older, more haggard than I had ever seen her. It was a stark reminder of how far things had fallen. The proceedings were swift. The evidence was clear, and it didn't take long for the judge to issue a verdict. Martha was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay restitution for the necklace, along with additional fines totaling $25,000. As the gavel struck, I felt a surge of vindication. This was justice, and I had finally reclaimed my life. With the divorce finalized shortly after and Martha's fate sealed, I began to embrace my newfound freedom. I focused on my career, pouring my energy into projects that inspired me. I took up new hobbies, explored the city, and spent quality time with my mother, who had been my rock throughout this tumultuous journey. In the months that followed, I learned to cherish my independence. I discovered my strength in solitude and began to rebuild my life on my terms. I reflected on the lessons I had learned about trust, respect, and the importance of standing up for myself. As I sat in my apartment one evening, sipping a glass of wine and watching the sunset over the city skyline, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I was no longer bound by the toxicity of my past. I had turned the page and was ready to embrace a bright new chapter filled with hope and possibilities. I had faced betrayal and fought for justice, and now I was finally free.